It takes place in Los Angeles in 1937, where billionaire Hannon is composing a letter to one of the employees of a hotel. He acknowledges in this letter that he has made a very dangerous discovery that will most probably kill him. At the end of it, he visits the ballroom and leaves the letter with bartender Ashton with a statement that a man named Douglas will take it away later. When Hannon returns home, Ashton takes the letter and opens the envelope, which disturbs him very much. Minutes later, Hannon arrives home and joins his wife in bed. He suddenly loses the room and wakes up in a 1999 laboratory. The city of 1937 and all the individuals living in it turn out to be a virtual reality simulator created by the company owned by Hannon. He goes out of the lab to his favorite bar where he has some drinks and takes his medicine under the scrutiny of some unscrupulous men. Then, he uses the payphone to leave a message to Douglas recorded on the answering machine. This orientation is interrupted by an unknown figure who appears at the back door and interrupts the call, which is much to the surprise of Hannon, and trails him to an alleyway. The stranger draws out a knife to stab him to death when he is on the point of telling him about his discovery. The following morning, the protege of Hannon, Douglas, listens to the messages on his machine, then goes to his bathroom where he is horrified after discovering blood in his sink and a blood-stained shirt in his trash can. Among the messages is that of the police, who informs him that he should hurriedly attend the police station. Douglas is not able to hear the rest of the messages and goes to the station at once and meets Detective McBain, who shows him a dead body. A devastated Douglas is able to confirm that it was Hannon and answers questions raised by McBain of the reason why he worked with Hannon and that they were also best friends. Then McBain and Douglas enter the office of Hannon. The detective is interested in knowing about the projects of the company, but Douglas simply states that they work on computer software. The rest is confidential information. It is at this time that they see a woman called Jane in the next room, and Douglas is shocked to hear her tell him that she is the daughter of Hannon, since he never told him that his boss had children. He even believes that he has seen her before. As McBain pulls Jane aside to interrogate her, Douglas goes to the 13th floor. Here, he goes to a programmer, Whitney, who is mourning about Hannon. He informs him of the simulation they have been developing, and that Hannon has been making continuous visits to that version of Los Angeles, even though they had many months of work before the initial trial. Whitney responds that he did not know that Jane existed when Douglas poses a question to him. Then Douglas comes back to the lobby and finds Jane leaving into a cab. He doubts her and requests the receptionist know where she is staying to trace her. Then McBain questions Whitney concerning the research of the company. Whitney describes how their virtual reality is immersed with simulated self-learning individuals without awareness that their computer programs and their decision to recreate Los Angeles in 1937 was due to the longing of Hannon to go back to his youth. Douglas locates Jane in the hotel and confronts her in the lobby because he wants to get to know more about her meeting with Hannon. Jane tells she spent her life in France, and several days ago her father asked her to come to the USA in order to help him close the company. Next, Jane sits with the lawyer of Hannon and reminisces about the will of her father, only to find out that he changed his mind at the last moment and the company will be passed to Douglas. Meanwhile, McBain is delivering this same news to Douglas, who is shocked and confused just like Jane is. This development now leaves Douglas a suspect. On the day of the murder, Douglas says that he did not speak to Hannon, hence. McBain clarifies that Hannon used his calling card the day before his death. Back home, Douglas gets the rest of the messages in his machine, and eventually Hannon is telling him about the letter he had hidden in the simulation. The recording stops when Hannon questions the person who is unknown, "How did you find me?" because he found something amazing. Douglas then dashes to the office, and upon searching about the information about Hannon using the computer, he requests Whitney to get him in touch. Whitney initially declines and reasons how dangerous it is, but Douglas persuades him by pointing out how the hints lead to him, and thus is either lying that he killed Hannon and remembers forgetting, or is a victim of a frame. When Whitney tells him that he can only allow him an hour, Douglas persuades him to allow him 2, which is risky. Douglas then gets into the simulation chamber, and following hours of lights and passing of time, he is present in the virtual reality and is in the body of a bank clerk. It is so weird, and Douglas has to rush to the bathroom to get himself pulled together. The boss claims that he is a terrible looking person and gives him the day off. Douglas comes out of the building and is astonished by the specifics of the old Los Angeles, which is so real. Whitney informed him that when Hannon linked to this reality, he possessed the body of an old time shop owner in Pasadena, and thus, after calming down, Douglas goes to see her in a cab. It is not long before Douglas arrives at the shop and is horrified to learn that the owner, Grierson, resembles Hannon to a dot. The man is not recognizing him, but he feels that Douglas is familiar. Douglas then goes to the hotel hotel where he requests the dancers to provide information about Hannon until one of them informs him to meet Ashton. Douglas is appalled to find out that the face of Ashton is identical to the face of Whitney, but the former does not comment on this fact. He only begins to ask questions. Ashton describes that Hannon is a habitual client, and he always hits young girls, something that even surprises Douglas. When he questions him about the letter, Ashton replies that he does not know what he is referring to. With a lack of notice, Douglas becomes sick as his timer is about to end, and thus he runs to the bathroom as his body begins to experience a seizure. The next thing, Douglas awakens in the lab when he is still feeling sick and the simulation is going on. Ashton observes that the body Douglas was in does not know where he has gone and how he got there. At the lab, Whitney attempts to make Douglas relax, and he reprimands her that the virtual reality is good and real as he has spent 2 hours. There are more unfortunate moments when Whitney hears that Hannon has been providing the virtual reality with girls. The conversation halts as a guard tells Douglas that somebody wants to see him at the lobby. Douglas descends the stairs and encounters Tom, who informs him that he had spotted Hannon in the bar last night. Tom also desires some one-on-one chat. Therefore, Douglas takes him to the parking lot. Tom then begins to hit Douglas, claiming that he stole Hannon after he requested money. Douglas retaliates and smacks Tom until he gets a broken head against a car window. Tom refers to Douglas as crazy and one of the most wanted in America and runs away. Jane is later called by Douglas, who asks her to dinner. He informs her that he received a message in which he was told by Hannon, but he is unaware in case he saw and spoke to him that day. Jane advises Douglas to pass all the information to the police and avoid the simulation, since it could be the reason why his memory is not functioning properly. Douglas believes that he had encountered Jane before, but she does not want to discuss her past. She dances with him and even informs him that she thinks she knows him too. She tells that the deja vu can be a love at first sight, and they kiss. The same night, the police arrive to arrest Douglas as the key suspect in the case of Hannon at his apartment. At the station, McBain tells Douglas that the security cameras caught his car on the footage in a bar where the murder occurred. According to the detectives, Douglas murdered Hannon because he would have put the company out of business. Tom informed the police also that he had seen Douglas leave the bar with Hannon. Tom is later found dead by the police a few hours later. Douglas stays overnight in jail, but the next morning, Jane gets him out on bail with an excuse. Douglas is determined to know the truth, so he returns to the lab and enters the simulation, and again, sets the timer to 2 hours. He leaves out the pressing of the button, and the time does not start. The computer attempts to caution him, but Douglas is already in the chamber. Douglas, when he comes to the virtual world, is at a dance competition. He abandons his companion and goes to an antique shop to break a window with a rock to get Grierson out. Grierson is hesitant initially, but Douglas clarifies to him that he can understand why he occasionally misses time and wakes up without knowing where he was. Upon the awakening, Grierson claims that he can see glimpses of the life of another man and believes that his wife smelled of girls on his clothes. He also says that he had discovered something odd under his bed. He presents a briefcase containing an expensive suit that he has never purchased, but it fits him so well. Douglas understands that Hannon had the suit here because he was to log in. He brings Grierson to a hotel where the employees refer to him as Hannon. Grierson desperately tries to find evoking traces of the memories of Hannon in the ballroom. The sight of the girls provides Grierson with hints, and he recollects that Hannon had handed a letter to a man. Ashton is looking when he points at the bartender, and he does not hesitate to exit the room. Douglas enters the locker room and is ambushed by Ashton at the back with a gun. Ashton indicates that he read the letter, and that led him to the realization that he is a mere creation of a computer. Ashton was obedient and drove to Tucson and overcame every barrier of Hannon. Eyed Tucson, he perceives the frontier of the world, and this makes him realize that this is a fake reality. He would like to understand what made Hannon and Douglas play with the minds of people, so he tells Douglas to demonstrate him what is really existing. Ashton shoots Douglas in the shoulder and the leg, laughing like a crazy man. He then fails to shoot Douglas in the head, and Douglas punches him and escapes. This is followed by a chase as Ashton continues shooting at random, and Douglas feels confused why the simulation is not over. Ashton trails the blood into the pool, and Douglas catches him and begins beating him up. He steals the gun of Ashton and places it in his mouth, inquiring where he has the letter. Ashton hands it to him. The letter is a lure to make him fall into a trap and begin crushing Douglas against a column. The two men fall down in the water, and Ashton beats him a bit more and then attempts to drown him. Whitney takes Douglas out of the simulation when Douglas is about to cease to breathe. The sight of that face causes Douglas to punch his friend, then he is aware that he is at home. Subsequently, Douglas informs Whitney that all the people in the simulation are as real as they are themselves, as well as their lives and feelings. He believes that they should not play around with the heads of people and that his project was wrong. Whitney explains that they did it so, and Douglas walks away and an angry man. At the hotel, McBain informs him that Jane has disappeared. Upon considerable research, McBain tells him that Hannon had no children, and there is no one in the US or France by that name, Jane. Douglas becomes concerned and locates the taxi driver who picked Jane and pays the driver to give information. The driver tells him that Jade took the cab to one of the local areas. Douglas visits there, inquires of people, and finds out that the individual being used by Jane is a cashier at grocery store. The cashier does not recognize Douglas, and she claims to know her. Douglas takes the instructions in the letter to mine the story of Ashton. He overcomes several barriers and gets to the brink of the world. He looks at a wall composed of code and wireframes. This demonstrates that the reality he faces in 1999 is just as deceptive as the reality he faces in 1937, and that he is not real. At the same time, McBain finds out who the cashier resembling Jane is, but that person is not known by Jane. When McBain orders his officer to investigate her records, he gets to know that her friends tell him that she spends the night on the street and spends the day sleeping. It is at that time that Jane changes into that body and notices McBain outside hiding and calls Douglas and arranges to meet at the office of Hannon. Jane later confides all in Douglas. She mentions that this is one of the virtual worlds, which has a simulation within a simulation. Jane did not kill Hannon. She was dispatched to his dead body to impersonate him as his daughter and succeed him in the company. She was expected to close it, but Hannon swindled them by altering his will. Douglas was the one who stabbed Hannon with her body, but this act was operated by a VR player, her husband, David. Jane claims that David got addicted to the simulation and was abusive. Jane believes that since Douglas and Hannon could see the edge of the world, they possess some soul and are real. Ever since the initiation of the simulation, Jane has observed Douglas and fallen in love. Douglas claims that he is not real and unlovable. In the meantime, Whitney links to the VR and appears in the body of Ashton when he is driving. He has to avoid the traffic, but he runs into boxes and cans. As he gazes at his new body in the mirror, he is then surrounded by the police and requested to provide his license. He looks in glove box and discovers a gun, conceals it, and steals the wallet of Ashton. The officer identifies the license and suspects that Whitney was telling the truth, that the car had slipped in the rain, and he lets him go. However, as Whitney is ready to drive away, he encounters a sound in the trunk. The police officer requests Whitney to open the trunk, and inside the trunk, he discovers a bleeding body of a bank teller tied. The police officer attempts to put him into custody, but he goes aside and is hit by a car. The clock runs out. Whitney is in the lab, yet he is unable to use the automatic doors and proceeds to attack them. The clock runs out. Whitney is in the lab, yet he is unable to use the automatic doors and proceeds to attack them with his fingers. The guard notices his suspicious acts on the surveillance cameras and warns Douglas. Jane calls McBain after Douglas departs to the lab. Douglas, a few minutes later, arrives into the company building and discovers the guard lying on the ground, unconscious and without a gun. He then gazes at Whitney, who is laughing at the TV as though it is a new thing. In the span of a few words, Douglas understands that it is really Ashton who came back since Whitney was killed by a car. Douglas tells Ashton about this world being a fake one, yet Ashton wants to visit where he was born. As events unfold, Jane is dominated over by the husband David, who is the body of Douglas. He remains silent and takes Ashton to the computer room where the simulation is going on. Ashton glances around. David takes the gun of the guard and shoots Ashton twice to the head to kill him. David later encounters Jane as Douglas. In the process of kissing, David unravels who he is and begins beating Jane because she involved another man. He throws her on the bed, choke her, whereby Jane picks an alarm clock and bangs him on the head. She runs as David shoots and dashes into the elevator. As David attempts to hold the door, she knocks on his hand until he releases it. David shoots at the doors, but the shots are not broken. The front doors of the lobby are locked, and Jane discovers them so. David quickly comes up and is about to shoot, but he misses, and the bullet smashes a window. McBain arrives at the scene due to the call of Jane, and he shoots David just in time. She prepared the death of her husband and used the body of Douglas to entrap his consciousness. McBain is now aware of the reality and instructs her not to invite more people of her world to this one. Douglas soon awakens in the actual body of David and gazes about. He picks up a newspaper in which it is indicated that the year is 2024. Jane wakes up and takes Douglas to her futuristic world and meets her dad on the beach. The same face had been used in designing Hannon. Turn on the notifications and subscribe to watch more videos of this type. Thanks for watching.